Welcome to History for Nap Time. Tonight, we travel back more than 2,000 years to meet a queen whose name has echoed across history, Cleopatra VII of Egypt. She is remembered as a woman of extraordinary beauty, a cunning politician, and a figure who captivated two of Rome's greatest men, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But how much of her story is fact, and how much is legend? Was Cleopatra truly the most beautiful woman in history, or was her allure something more, a fusion of intelligence, charisma, and careful self-presentation? In this episode, we'll explore how Cleopatra used her beauty, her mind, and her presence to shape history. And along the way, we'll look at her relationships, her rituals, and the myths that grew after her death. To understand Cleopatra, we need to understand the world she was born into. Cleopatra VII was born in 69 BC in Alexandria, the shining jewel of Egypt, founded by Alexander the Great. Her family, the Ptolemies, were Macedonian Greeks who had ruled Egypt for centuries. They built a dynasty that blended Greek and Egyptian traditions, and they ruled from the magnificent city of Alexandria, with its great library, its bustling harbor, and its famous lighthouse, one of the wonders of the ancient world. The Ptolemaic dynasty was known for intrigue, rivalries, and ruthless ambition. Brothers and sisters married, plotted, and sometimes murdered one another for the throne. Cleopatra grew up in this environment of luxury and danger. By the time she came of age, Egypt was a wealthy but fragile kingdom. Rome loomed as a growing superpower, and the Nile's riches were too tempting for Roman generals to ignore. For Cleopatra, survival meant not just ruling Egypt, but also managing Rome. It was in this high-stakes world that her beauty, her wit, and her political skill became her greatest weapons. Cleopatra became queen at just 18 years old, sharing power with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. It was a troubled arrangement, and soon her brother's advisors forced her into exile. But Cleopatra was not one to accept defeat. She planned her return, and when Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 48 BC, she saw her chance. Here we come to one of the most famous stories of history, Cleopatra's dramatic entrance. According to legend, she had herself rolled inside a carpet, or possibly a linen sack, and smuggled into Caesar's quarters. When the bundle was unrolled, the young queen appeared before him, not as a defeated exile, but as a dazzling, confident monarch. This story, whether fully true or exaggerated by later writers, captures something essential about Cleopatra. She understood the power of drama, spectacle, and presence. Her beauty was not just physical. It was a performance, a carefully staged moment that would never be forgotten. Ancient sources often describe Cleopatra's beauty, but when we read carefully, we notice something important. They rarely say she was the most physically beautiful woman. Instead, they speak of her charm, her voice, her intellect. Plutarch, a Greek historian writing a century later, put it clearly. Her actual beauty, it is said, was not in itself so remarkable, but the contact of her presence, if you lived with her, was irresistible. The attraction of her person, joined with the charm of her conversation and the character that attended all she said or did, was something bewitching. This tells us that Cleopatra's true allure was not in appearance alone. It was in how she carried herself, how she spoke, how she made others feel. Still, Cleopatra did cultivate beauty in practical ways. Ancient legends tell us she bathed in donkey's milk to keep her skin soft and radiant. She used kohl eyeliner, not just for aesthetics, but also to protect her eyes from the Egyptian sun. Her lips were colored with red pigments, and her hands were perfumed with fragrant oils. Perfume was especially important. Egypt was famous for its perfumes, and Cleopatra controlled the production. She experimented with unique blends, and some stories even say she created her own signature scent. When she met Mark Antony, her ship's sails were soaked in perfume, so the air carried her presence before she arrived. This wasn't vanity, it was politics. Cleopatra understood that beauty was not only about appearance, but about creating an atmosphere of memory and desire. People remembered her not only for what they saw, but for what they smelled, heard, and felt. Cleopatra's alliance with Caesar was one of the most decisive moments of her life. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, he was already the most powerful man in Rome. By aligning herself with him, Cleopatra secured her throne, defeated her rivals, and began her journey into legend. Their relationship was not merely romantic, it was deeply political. Cleopatra offered Caesar wealth, grain from the Nile, and a powerful ally in the east. Caesar gave her military backing and legitimacy. Together they had a son, Caesarion, the only known child of Caesar. For Cleopatra, this child represented the union of Egyptian royalty and Roman power. When Cleopatra visited Rome, she shocked the city by appearing openly as Caesar's partner. For the conservative Romans, it was scandalous. For Cleopatra, it was a statement. She was not a mistress, but a queen. Her beauty and charisma were part of this success. But what truly impressed Caesar, and others, was her boldness, her intelligence, and her ability to play the game of politics as an equal. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra needed another Roman ally. She found one in Mark Antony. Their first meeting has become the stuff of legend. Antony summoned Cleopatra to explain her role in the politics of the East. She responded not with fear, but with theater. She sailed up the river on a golden barge, with purple sails, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite. Musicians played, incense filled the air, and Cleopatra lay under a canopy, radiant and untouchable. Antony, known for his love of luxury, was enchanted. Their partnership began with spectacle, but it grew into a true alliance of power and, by all accounts, passion. They lived lavishly, hosting extravagant feasts. Cleopatra wagered that she could host the most expensive dinner in history. To prove it, she dissolved a priceless pearl in vinegar and drank it, astonishing Antony and everyone present. Again, beauty here was not passive. It was active, theatrical, and tied to authority. Cleopatra projected herself as both lover and goddess, binding Antony to her politically as well as emotionally. To the Romans, Cleopatra became a dangerous symbol. Octavian, Caesar's heir and Antony's rival, spread propaganda portraying Cleopatra as a temptress who had bewitched Antony and threatened to corrupt Rome. She was painted as a foreign sorceress, a seductress who used her beauty to weaken men. This image stuck for centuries. Plays, poems, and later films would repeat it. Cleopatra as the exotic femme fatale. But behind this smear campaign was fear. Cleopatra represented an independent Egypt, rich, powerful, and unwilling to bow to Rome. Her beauty became the weapon Octavian used against her, an excuse to justify conquest. The story of Cleopatra's death is as famous as her life. After Antony was defeated at the Battle of Actium, he and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt. When Octavian's forces closed in, Antony fell on his sword. Cleopatra, left with no escape, chose to die on her own terms. The most famous version says she allowed a venomous snake, an asp, to bite her. Some suggest she used poison hidden in a comb or ointment. However it happened, her death was a final act of control. She refused to be paraded in Rome as a trophy. She chose dignity, drama, and myth. In dying as she did, Cleopatra ensured her legend would outlive her kingdom. Cleopatra's beauty has been exaggerated and romanticized for centuries. Painters and filmmakers have imagined her as the most stunning woman who ever lived. But ancient evidence suggests something different, that her power lay less in physical appearance and more in personality. She spoke many languages, could debate philosophy, negotiate politics, and command attention. She understood how to use spectacle and performance. She knew how to turn beauty into a political tool. The Cleopatra we remember is part reality, part myth. But in either form, she remains Cleopatra
unforgettable.
VII of Egypt was more than just a beautiful queen. She was a ruler who fought to keep her kingdom alive in the shadow of Rome. Her beauty was part of her power, but it was her intelligence, charisma, and courage that truly made her remarkable. She captivated Julius Caesar. She enchanted Mark Antony. She terrified Octavian. And she left behind a story that has fascinated the world for 2,000 years. This has been History for Nap Time. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the past. May the echoes of Cleopatra's story stay with you as you drift into calm reflection.